crime analysis grew out of California, but if you go back to Herman Goldstein, as far back as when he was chief of staff at the Chicago PD, so most people don't know some of that important history. The IACA for me is probably the proxy or pseudo of that family. If you're prepared to, for the first couple years of your career, move, if you really want to get into the profession, internships I think are invaluable. Volunteering, if you need to get your foot in the door, coming to a conference, it's stepping up, and it's not for everybody.
What's going on, analysts? Welcome to the channel where we talk about all things crime analysis. In this video, I spoke with Dr. Noel Fritz, Director of Data Analytics and Strategic Initiatives for the Fairfax County Police Department of Virginia. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm here in Chicago at the IACA conference and had a chance to sit for a one-on-one with Dr. Noel Fritz, a longtime analyst. Since 1994, he served as an IACA board member for 10 years, 7 as a president. He's been an analyst, professor, supervisor, and currently serving as the Director of Data Analytics and Strategic Initiatives for Fairfax County Police Department. He's also a Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. I asked Noah to talk to me about what inspired him over the years and his motivation to keep his passion for crime analysis. And here's how it went.
I'm really more a pretty simple guy, to be honest with you. I mean, I take life and the profession seriously. And I would, can learn a long time ago not to take myself as seriously. I think people think I am this serious guy. Many cases, people said, they were afraid to come up and talk to me. But I would rather have the conversation at the bar or like this, kind of one-on-one. Gave a few speeches over the years, but I really tried. Ultimately, I took the term president as the underlying word to preside over. And I think at the time, especially at the time, that was important. And that's kind of when we grew with committees and we set, I think, a pretty strong agenda to do the 3 things that we did. But who I am just really is the guy that wants to go to a ball game and have a beer and spend that 5 hours, not even watching the game, but talking to people and getting to know who they are and what they do and how they do it and engage. And in some ways, that I've come through that. This new generation's more electronic and texting. I'm a little old school with that. I mean, I can do it. I've got 2 kids now, in late 20s and early 30s. But they're my life. My family's my life. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. We used to have family reunions. We'd still do them every 2 years. And I just love seeing I don't have any grandkids yet, but I've got great nieces and nephews. One was just born 8 months ago, and I just got a chance to see her. And the IACA for me is probably the proxy or pseudo or extension of that family is how I would do that. So for me, coming to this, after I've been to all but one of these. The one I didn't come to is when I got an award for Mary and I didn't show up. But I've been to, I don't know if it's 32, 31?
32nd year.
32. So I've been to 31, if there's been that many conferences, all but one conference. I was there last year with the masks on and I hated it because I'm a people person and a facial person. I couldn't recognize anybody from their eyes. But it is a family reunion for me. And same thing for IACA. This year, first time in my life, I lived on the East Coast. I'm in Fairfax, Virginia now, without telling anybody except for Chris Bruce, who's been a colleague and a friend for 20 plus years. I showed up to the IACA conference unannounced one day, went to their reception and came home just to see the people and pat them on the back and shake their hands and just to say hello, and so that's really who I am. Jason Elder talked about me being the grandfather and the tree and all that. And so coming here, I really do feel like the proud grandfather that kind of gets to sit in the corner that in some ways people don't really want to pay attention to. I mean, half these young kids wouldn't know who I was, right? Who's Hank Aaron, who's Babe Ruth, that kind of mentality. But to sit back and be proud of this group and this board and what somebody said 20-something committees now, and hopefully we'll chat a little about that because that is a message I want to send about maybe where we need to go a little bit with that. But that is where that passion still comes from, is that I am still strongly connected more to the people that give their, like police officers or the military, that come to work every day, day in and day out, and do the job. And to see that energy and to see the success is continues to drive me. Now, I've got a lot of energy. I'm 63 years old. I'm technically 2 years away from fully retiring. I tried that and I came back mainly because of money, insurance mostly. And if I stay 4 more years, I'll get another retirement out of the state of Virginia, and then I can go golfing and drink beer with the third retirement. That's about all that'll cover, and maybe an Uber ride to the golf course so I don't get in trouble. So. Sure, and you got to remember what was also happening around the early 1990s. So major changes in policing, the money the Department of Justice invested into more police officers also invested into technology, but also Herman Goldstein and problem-oriented policing. A lot of, I won't call it academic, although it's more of applied researchers and what I call kind of applied criminologists, were putting pressure on the system to become more data-driven or more evidence-based. And back then we didn't even call it those things, right? And crime analysis was kind of grew out of California through a state program. But if you go back to Herman Goldstein, as far back as when he was like a chief of staff at the Chicago PD, and so most people don't know some of that important history, right? Chris Bruce would be the best guy to talk to. He's the most knowledgeable guy I know. I'm getting old. I have selective memory, but if you want the details, Chris would be still the good one to talk to. But really, a guy like Herman Goldstein, who I got to meet, who I've had a chance to drink beers with, and if that's the role I get to play in some future conferences where people aren't afraid to step up, or a chat like this with smaller groups to encourage people. The stuff Don Reby is doing about the energy and the confidence in order to hand the baton or to carry the torch, if you will, to the next level. And I'm really pleased with this new board, what we're doing, the expansion, and I think more than anything, it's just, whether I'm around or not, we'll see. I'm planning on disappearing for a while, and I'm tired. and it has nothing to do with crime analysis. I'm just, I'm ready to go. For a year, I lived in an RV. I went to teach at a university. COVID happened. I think that's really where I'm more tired. I'm not recovered. I had COVID, full-blown COVID. Thank God I didn't go to the hospital. But I ended up walking away from a teaching professor position in a small university in Iowa, and bought an RV. And it was going to be for 6 months or so, turned into a year. And I just kind of, I didn't re-energize because it was still going on. It still is politically. My heart and the things that are happening now, social unrest. I'm really concerned for public safety and the views that are, that are taken, and I'm critical. I live this kind of love-hate relationship with when we do the wrong thing, we need to fess up to it. But, the police are such a critical piece. Crime analysis is such a critical piece. And so what I did was I was able to get through COVID by spending time in an RV, and it's called boondocking, where I spent about a week in a state park, and then I'd go into the national forest where you don't have a fee, and that's how I lasted for 12 months. I was paying out of pocket for insurance. That was the main reason I was going to the university. I had a 9-month contract. I'd have 3 months off to go golfing and camping and, go up and look at grizzly bears. I just got back from Alaska. Before I came here, I came directly from Alaska, 2-week vacation. Saw a moose, rode a bicycle, almost ran into a moose, that kind of fun stuff. But ultimately, for me, there will be a time where I will get just to sit back. But I hope to be a part of it. I'd like to see us bring all the presidents back and have a panel, for example, to talk about what we're talking about, in terms of, how do they see it now, a decade, 2 decades, in some cases 3 decades away, before we lose some of us. A lot of people don't know it. I had a heart attack 2.5 years ago. And heart's good, put in a couple stints. Most of it's more my diet and cholesterol. It's not that I'm not active, but it was a pretty good scare. And I've had those moments that have led me here. I really believe, whether it's God or fate or whatever you want to call it, things happened in my life going all the way back to when I was in grad school that guided me to this point right here. Certain events, certain opportunities. I think I put myself always in a great position to leverage that, but somebody else was guiding my path, even where I'm at right here today. If you had asked me a year and a half ago, would I be in Fairfax? Was that a goal of mine to go to a big agency or do whatever? I would have said no way. I was actually on my way to Cambridge, Massachusetts to be an analyst, to kind of hide in a cubicle, to get the insurance and just get 3 more years under my belt, and then eventually retire. And one thing led to another. For me, it started in undergrad. I had a couple of great professors, and it wasn't about crime analysis. It didn't even exist. It would have been 1984, right? I didn't even know whether I was going to work in policing. I wasn't looking to work in policing. But a Dr. Paul Baker, a sociologist, did most of the education stuff. He did a class on social problems, and his methodology and his teaching and the way he taught logical thinking and critical thinking was probably the first person. And nobody in this profession would even know who Paul Baker, Illinois State University right down the road from Chicago. I had a stat professor who brought me on as a research assistant as an undergraduate. He got a grant to do a study on ridership on the bus, and I was the guy that rode the bus and took random interviews, and I spent 8 hours a day on the bus for the whole summer. Boringest job I've ever had, but interesting to watch. So they had a random number digit generator, and so I'd have to count the 3rd person on the bus, and then I have to wait for the 7th person. I had to follow this protocol, so it was a random sample, and you learn from that. As an undergrad, you learn, like, that's crazy. I'm going to be on here. I only get to do. Why can't I just interview the next person that comes on the bus? And so I learned those kinds of things and the value of the research and some of that from really early on. And then I had the opportunity to go to grad school at ASU, and undergrad was social and criminal justice, but I went to a program called Justice Studies. And it's more about fairness, and it's more about women in work, and it's about indigenous people. And even though I was interested in criminology, and I consider myself a kind of geographic criminologist based on what I've done over my career, it really is the passion for making sure that our systems and law enforcement operate in a fair and procedural way, and we think critically about the services we provide, because we really work for our client is the citizen, the victim. A lot of people get caught up on offenders and arrests, and it's baked in, it's mission critical. But for me, it's always been, what are we doing to make people safe so we don't have another one? And I've had some interesting experiences with detectives that don't want to go out and do crime prevention because they won't catch the next guy. He'll get wind that he or she will get wind. It's usually a he in a violent crime or a rapist or something like that, would stop or would move somewhere else or take a break. But if we prevent it in any way to have another victimization, I think we need to do the things that are necessary, because at the end of the day, it's traumatic for that person, whether it's a woman, a child, gangs, losing somebody in a drive-by shooting. I mean, the list goes on and on. Or just the things like the cost of, retail fraud that we all pay as taxpayers in the billions of dollars, and we just kind of ignore it, and it's the cost of doing business, and it shouldn't be. So, talked about earlier about how things happened to me that I really felt guided me here, and they had nothing to do with what I'll call an aha moment. It was being at the right place at the right time. I think most of us don't pay attention to the signals we get, whether it's, again, karma, fate, whatever it is, a conversation at a bar, riding on an airplane, and somebody says, oh, you should write a book, and it's the thing that motivates you to say, well, yeah, I can do that, or I should do that, right? For me, I was working at the Arizona Department of Public Safety, and I was not in crime analysis. At that point, they had not had any full-time crime analysts in the state of Arizona about 1990. 88, 89 was probably when I started there. And I literally was frustrated with the job. It was a bean counting, count traffic accidents. I wouldn't have lasted very long. I had just gotten, I've been married. I got married as an undergrad, and my wife just got pregnant, so I took a full-time job and kind of went back to part-time in grad school. And I came to work because I was having this conflict with a supervisor. Surprised that I get in conflicts with people, right? I won't go into that. But I came into work one day with a job announcement taped to my computer screen. A little want ads that Tempe, Arizona was looking for a crime analyst. I didn't even know what it was. I wasn't actively pursuing it because I was doing my due diligence as a new father or about to be father. And I literally looked into it, and that was the trigger. But I didn't go actively looking for the want ads. And I literally go through that process of, I think 100, 200 people applied back in 1989, 88. We took a test. We had a 100-question test that they put me through. And to land at Tempe, who was the 100th accredited agency, and back then a standard for CALEA was to have a full-time crime analyst. They backed away from that now, and somebody in the department needs to do these analytical things. It could be a records clerk, it could be a lieutenant, it could be anybody. But back then, you had to hire a full-time crime analyst was one of the standards, and I got hired under that mandate. And the department, open arms, particularly the commander, John Wayne Greco. So again, to have somebody like that, he was my mentor. He was a San Francisco police officer. He was a gay police officer. Everybody knew it in Tempe, but he literally took me and my predecessor, Sean Baer, under his arm, his wing, his direction, and as a mentor, he really provided us early on the confidence to be able to step up and be in a position in the department where we had the confidence to get them to go in the right direction and not sit back afraid. I've got confidence. I've always had confidence. I have short man disease, right? Nobody said I should play basketball. I made varsity basketball in high school. I shouldn't have played baseball. I ran the 2 mile. I have a high school 2 mile record. People don't know that. I do not have a long distance running physique. I'm 5'8" now. Back then I was 5'6". But if you tell me I can't do something, you better get out of the way, because I'm that bull in the China room, in the China store, where I'm gonna find a way to prove you're wrong. And as much as I've had those challenges, I've also had great opportunities that just almost got put out in front of me. IACA, right? The success of that happened because I got the CMAP job. Somebody came to a Colorado crime analysis meeting and said, we're looking to start a crime mapping program at the University of Denver. I chased the guy out. He was a deputy director. I chased him out to the parking lot and says, not only will I help you recruit for that position, I'm interested. I wrote the job description for that. He let me, collaborate with him. And the next thing I know, I've got a decade of working for the Department of Justice in that CMAP and crime mapping program that gave me the flexibility to drive the IACA. Most people don't know it. We invested a lot of money through that program into certification. We hosted seminars, webinars, not webinars at the time, seminars. We brought people in to brainstorm about certification, about the book. And we, of course, went to every conference, and we provided a lot of crime mapping training at the time, which was really a major push. Even before Esri was thinking about, crime mapping and stuff, Lou Nelson and I, the guy, again, I run into a guy like that who's the ex-chief of police, and he gives me every computer lab we've ever needed, and they're still here now 20, almost 30 years later, doing GIS stuff for us as a profession. That's just amazing to me, right? Came in as the first crime analyst in the state of Arizona for the Tempe, Arizona Police Department. They weren't sure what it was. I'll be real honest with you. Nobody in the department said, oh, we have a GO or a job description. It was pretty generic at the time. And they sent me off. I mean, they said, go find some things to go to. I went to California. I got Steve Gottlieb's training. You talk about the grandfather of crime analysis? It's Steve Gottlieb. Right, I took what he had. Him and I have agreed to disagree on certain things, but I have all the respect for him, and I owe him a great deal of my success based on the ideas and really the bread and butter, or the tackling and blocking that I learned from Steve and his book and things that he did early on. California had already probably been very progressive in a statewide program, DOJ, California to DOJ, in implementing that. But the community policing and primary policing, again, in 1990 was starting to take hold. We were an original, it was called INOP, Innovative Neighborhood-Oriented Policing. It was one of the first DOJ grants that they gave out for problem-oriented policing and community policing. NYPD was one. A couple other, I think there were 8 of us, and nobody even knows what INOP is, only the agencies that were involved. And they had a whole couple of years worth of technical assistance and help and support. Herman Goldstein came in and did a 3-day work session just for our police department because of that kind of a program. So, right place, right time again. If problem-oriented policing and the federal government wasn't doing certain things like that, and there was enough constructive criticism of reactive policing at the time, which was happening at the late 80s, early 90s, that set the stage for me to come in and bring crime analysis to my department as a single crime analyst. Within a year and a half, I got promoted and I hired 2 people, Sean Baer and Paul Bentley, who were very instrumental. much smarter than me, and that's that tree effect, right? And Rachel Bobo was a paid intern at Tempe. So there was something in our water. So again, lucky place, good place to be, but there's these generations that went out and recruited, and we really grew that. And you got folks like Sean Baer and what he did with some of the software now LexisNexis owns, what we used to be Attack and some of the things he did. And Paul Bentley rehired me. I went back to Tempe, and that's where I ended up retiring from. So full circle, but all those years, still being part of crime analysis. Even when I was a professor for 5 years and taught crime mapping and problem solving and crime analysis. So, and a lot of that is more not even a lot of they're well respected in terms of what they do. People that are there now. But there's something else, and it has to do with that level of confidence that they would continue to step up in leadership roles, whether that's Mary or Mike or Brittany, who got the President's Award this year, things like that. Certainly there's other people in the rest of the country. I don't want to deny Arizona or think that the rest of the country is denied by virtue of that. But there's something. California's always been a leader in this, but they're so big, they kind of have always been able to do what they needed to do within their own and had the support of their own state, where the rest of us kind of did it one agency at a time, and we grew the association. We were one of the first state associations after California, and it was no cost. It was we just met for a meeting, and sometimes we'd meet for lunch. And as more and more departments brought on crime analysis, Glendale, where Brian worked, was one of the second department that brought on a crime analysis, even before a big agency like Phoenix. So I think the other part of that is part of that confidence, whether it's, that got passed on over the years, really started with John Wayne Greco, where the very first day on the job, he said, I want you to go to every commander in the department, knock on their door, don't set up a meeting, shake their hand, introduce yourself, and ask them, how do they want to be referred? Do they want to be Captain so-and-so? Do they want to be Mike? Who do they want to be? Go in and sit down and talk to the chief. And right out of the box, I'm 20, I don't know what I was, 1990, I would have been 30 years old. 89 when I first got hired, probably 30 years old, born in 59. And that level of confidence, again, not by practice. I didn't go to a class on leadership or confidence building. We're doing that today, right? Everybody's got to write a book about it. He instilled that in me, and more importantly, gave me the permission and the direction to simply go do it. And that's if you talk about the seed that planted my passion and my confidence, it was a simple directive from that, what would have been a deputy chief, to go and knock on doors throughout my department without being asked, not being timid, and sticking your hand out and having a firm handshake and introducing yourself. People knew that we were hiring a crime analyst, but then having that one-on-one short conversation, which turned into coffees in the future. We need tactical crime analysts in detectives, so I would have a relationship, building those. I'm in the middle of a intellectual and bureaucratic or administrative debate about whether after COVID analysts should come back in. I sat in a session the other day, and of course the analysts all want to be able to work from home. I'm really concerned that we miss the value of the people. Maybe it's generational, and maybe it's the way we communicate, but I don't for 1 second think it's not. There's a place for face-to-face, build relationships that has to happen when you touch, fist bump, hug somebody. I come back here, family reunion. It's about hugging the people that have been part of my family for 33 years now, right? And if you go into your agency thinking you're part of that law enforcement community, that family, that really the officers have, right? But you've got to be invited to that. I ended up playing on the Police Olympics basketball team in my 30s as a civilian. Now professional staff, right? Back then we call it non-sworn, right? And their agency's still doing it. Fairfax County calls it civilian. They don't call it non-something. At least we're not a non-entity anymore, which really makes us crazy. But you wonder why we're not, embedded as much. When you have a title called non-sworn, you're non-essential. And today, we made that, and my chief embraced it, that the crime analysts are an essential position in the department, and that's why we want to bring them back. We've got other people that are working a little bit. We have the flexibility to do telework, but when I brought my analysts back, many of them were not happy. They thought they proved that they could work from home. And it wasn't about whether they could do the job or most of their job here or there. I'm completely comfortable with the flexibility. We have to be flexible. We cover 24 hours a day, 65 days a year, 365 days a year, and we work a 40-hour work week, and I got 15 analysts, so I've got more flexibility. But if you're the only analyst in a small agency, you're covering that sexual assault that happened on a Saturday night at 2 o'clock in the morning, and the burglary that happened on Tuesday morning at 4 a.m., in a house that, left unprotected. So, but I've changed departments. I've been, I've moved around. I've stayed in the profession. But every time I go to a new place, I don't have that, right? Unless I go in as a consultant, then you got the 50-mile rule where we're paying this guy some amount of money and he must be an expert, so we'll listen to him. I went back to Tempe, and I'm just that guy. They knew me from 1990. I didn't have as much clout, believe it or not, even though I've done all these interesting things. But it's very fascinating. But what I really think, what I would encourage, especially new analysts to do, if it wants to carry, is the difference between, is it a job, is it a career, and more importantly, is it a profession? And I see those in a hierarchy, right? But by getting involved with the IACA, you have stepped up, and especially if you get involved in a leadership, whether that's a committee chair position or the board or whatever it is, you are now vested in your profession, and it's a volunteer organization, and there's benefits from it. You get to go to conferences and travel and do international things, which are great. But it literally gets you that confidence, because now you're beginning to interact. You're starting to present. You have to make decisions, and in some ways you have an appreciation for your bosses who are making tough decisions every day. Where if you sit back and let people tell you what to do, and there's a lot of places that still operate that way. And we own our own, especially I think we're at a turning point with George Floyd and some of these other things. Policing is at a major turning point. And if there was ever a time that we needed to be more analytical and more action-oriented and informed decision-making, it's today. We are under scrutiny, and the data can help us get through this storm. We've been through, America has always been a country of controversy, right? Civil War, civil rights, World War I, Vietnam War, women's rights, you name it. This isn't new for us. I mean, people think, oh my God, the world's, the sky's falling. Yeah, it's cracking, but we've always, been able to rebuild and build, I think, stronger after that. So I think it's an opportunity in this profession, across the board, even if you're a single agency, analyst in a single agency, to step up and drive that. I really think new chiefs want you to be the professional that you can be and tell them the answers, where they need to be, what they need to do, where they need to be, hotspot policing, time of day, day of week, and not, it's scary to make predictions and forecasts. But we're really talking about probabilities, and you're better off if you're here. And you might send people there and nothing happens, and they're like, well, you said something was going to happen. No, you went there and you probably scared them away. And if nothing happened, then if no other reason, let's be happy that where we thought it was going to happen, we didn't, right? And we can begin to study displacement or what's going on. So I think we're at a good place as we're coming out of COVID, coming out of this anti-policing, mentality. But I also think we are seeing a lot of change in police leadership. And so there's another generation of executives and chiefs of police who I think are prepared to embrace evidence-based. I think we have some applied universities that are doing more to help us make everyday decisions and not just this higher level theoretical or academic or, publish or perish. I mean, and I've been in that environment as well. But that's all right. But I really think all of those things coming together are going to put it, and that's probably where I still get my passion, that I think there's work to be done and that there's an opportunity here. And I would challenge the 600 people that are at this conference to go back and step up. I always leave here and I'm energized. And that's why coming every year was so important, because it is easy also to get burnt out, to get tired of getting pushed back or, and so it's a great opportunity for everybody. Yeah, again, opportunities, right? I took a year off with COVID and wasn't necessarily thinking about getting back, although that's what I do and what I know. And Annie, vice president here of administration for the IACA, was doing a technical assistance in Davenport, Iowa. I grew up right across the river from Davenport, Iowa. They call it the Quad Cities. It's really about 8 cities around on both sides of the river, Iowa and Illinois, and none of them have a crime analysis unit, and it's probably a community of 250,300 people. Davenport was entertaining and got a grant. They're one of the Safe Cities initiatives, and was looking to do that, and I got involved when I was teaching that semester in Iowa. And that pulled me back in. Annie was on Facebook or on IACA, and a picture of herself, at a restaurant in Davenport, Iowa, so I called her, that connection, right? What are you doing in my hometown? What in my Quad Cities? And I went and had lunch with her, or dinner with her, and we got talking, and then she kind of brought me in, and I was literally gonna stand up a crime analysis unit from scratch at Davenport, Iowa. The grant kept getting pushed back, and my savings account was dwindling. Again, it's just the way life is, right? You got to put food on the table. And I said, if I don't get the job offer, we don't finish this deal, I'll continue to help, but I'm applying for a couple other places, and I applied for Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I applied for Fairfax. Somebody, sent me an email, said, hey, there's a really cool job at Fairfax. Brand new chief, and the fact that he's a reformed chief, he's out of Baltimore, Kevin Davis, he really was the one that recruited me. I was on my way to Cambridge, and he gave me a personal phone call. I've never had a chief call me personally and say, whatever we got to do to bring you here, we want you. You have, the medicine kit that we're looking for. And he convinced me to come to Fairfax. And again, that opportunity, I was literally on my way driving I was in Pennsylvania on my way to Boston when he made me, I took a detour and went down and visited Fairfax. I'd been to the DC area, but not Fairfax, and took a hard look at the agency. And in literally mid-course, I ended up going there. So I think, again, to those opportunities pop up. In terms of where the IAC needs to go in that, is that, there's so much turnover in policing. Even chiefs of police, a long career might be 6 years. 10 years would be, a lifetime for a chief of police. And I've had experiences where I've had a different boss at San Diego County Sheriff's Department. I had 3 different captains in 18 months. If you don't have your own focus, your own mission, your own vision, your own plan, right? You're going to get diverted every time somebody new comes in, and a new chief's going to have new ideas. But if you have a clear strategic plan, even if it's just your own, right, or a professional development plan individually, and then largely for what the crime analysis unit should be doing, what our role is, and you're confident about that, right? That you keep the course. So yep, I got to do these things. Whether that's FOIAs or clery requests or things like that. Yep, I'm gonna have to find a way to do that. But we can automate a lot of those things. I'm still gonna stay focused the lion's share of my time doing whatever you're committed to, whether it's tactical crime analysis or an improving investigative or intelligence analysis, or bringing the two together. And I think that's an important future. So the IAC needs to step up and be a stronger voice. We have 600 people, we have 5,000 members. We just passed that 5,000 threshold. Was announced at one of the meetings, and we have to stop being timid. The leadership particularly needs to have a voice at IACP. We need to not just do our own white papers about what we do, but we need to talk about policing, because we are a force to be reckoned with in these day and times, and I think we've got an opportunity. I missed that opportunity with problem-oriented policing. Even as much as I embrace Herman Goldstein and Sarah and the problem solving, the IACA, because we were so busy with certification, the book, and one of the 3 things we did, the book, the training series. Those 3 things is what we committed to. I missed the opportunity we did problem solving. It was part of our training, but we really had an opportunity in the times to embrace that and really take it over. And the POP Center and the POP guides, that's really done by more of an academic group, and we didn't embrace that as much as we could have or should have. Right now, we have an opportunity to be more transparent. And if analysts don't embrace the fact that the public is going to want more information, how we do that, what that looks like in a democracy, right? We're going to miss that opportunity as well to help chiefs succeed, to help police departments succeed in these difficult times. We have what would be the evidence or the data to really get us to critically think about what is the right decision, what does fairness look like, what does that balance look like. And we got to get away from surveillance and undercover. It's spy work. It has to happen in some cases, but so much of crime is a public activity, right? Our entire criminal justice system is based on an open. You and I can walk into a courtroom and listen to a case, the prosecution and the defense, and hear all the details of what happened. You'll see it on the news, on cable TV. Nothing in our crime world happens secretly. We're not, I won't say any other countries, I don't want to offend anybody, but other countries can operate, behind the scenes and do that. And we do that when it's important, Homeland Security or terrorism, and I understand that. But even those ought to be more public. We need to be. A whole part of the criminal justice system was letting the citizens know this is unacceptable. This happened and justice was done. When you think about some of those things, that can't just be a slogan. The system has to deliver when people break the law or break the rules, and I don't care who you are, that's the way the system is designed. And we play a major role in that because we're a significant part of gathering information. And we're not detectives, we're not out interviewing, collecting evidence, we're not crime scene. A lot of people used to confuse us with the CSI effect, right? And it's kind of funny. And you ride on an airplane, oh, you're CSI. Well, not really, but this is what we do, or we might use, DNA or evidence to work on what we do, but we have our own, niche or role to play. And even on operating the police department, most people don't find the administrative crime analysis that sexy. But the budget right now, we're 200 down. Every department here was talking about we're hiring people. Well, if they're hiring analysts, exponentially they're hiring police officers, right? And we're just at that place. And what role do we play in helping good analysis in terms of police work, what calls for service, responding in that way? So that we have an opportunity to step up and be a stronger voice in the larger law enforcement community and in the larger criminal justice community. Well, it's like a number of people. Albert said it at the management or the supervisory panel that he facilitated. Back when he applied, there weren't that many jobs open. When I applied, there were 200, and we had 150 people apply for 3 positions just this year. There are more opportunities. IACA, the website, they're there. Different than I'd say it was before breaking in, but we still look for, and we've raised the bar. I probably wouldn't hire anybody without at least an undergraduate degree, and to be a crime analyst too, you have to have 3 years experience. We didn't hire anybody less than that one in this particular most recent. But I think if you're prepared to, for the first couple of years of your career, move, if you really want to get into the profession, internships I think are invaluable. Volunteering, if you need to get your foot in the door. Again, it's part of that people, as much as I don't want to say it's about, who you know and that kind of thing, it certainly helps in terms of that, coming to a conference and interacting with people. But it's stepping up, right? And it's not for everybody, right? There's something that's happened. My dad was a career tool and die maker. Worked for the same company for 30 years after World War II. My brother-in-law, John Deere, another farm implement company, his whole career. I've moved around. Some people in government will stay over. Policing can, it tends not to be, transferable, although you're seeing it now. We're recruiting out of state, trying to steal officers away from other folks. But I think I'm also a pragmatist, right? Therapy analysts are going to come on board and then move. They want to get to the federal government or another analyst, or some want to be supervisors, some don't. Some want to become consultants. Some want to work in the private sector. We have to accept that as supervisors, managers, leaders of this profession, and not think that there's this straight line from point A to point B. And I've always wanted, I think that's back to that tree thing, is helping people become the best that they can be. And if they want to be a forensic scientist and they're a crime analyst for 5 years, what do you bring? What do you help us, build capacity? And then I'm going to help you back to go what direction you want to go. It never bothered me once when somebody came to me and said, hey, I applied for a job over at Phoenix to be a tactical analyst, or a homicide analyst or something like that, or I'm going over to the state. I'm like, I'll write you a letter of recommendation. What do you need from me? Professional development, sitting down and thinking, what does that look like for you? I think, some, you want it tomorrow, you want 6 figures, you want it. You got to pay your dues as well. And I guess like I said, the short man's disease. I stepped up, and you got to do the work, right? So the advice I have is make sure this is your passion. And sometimes you don't know that until you've done it. That's why I like internships, because I want to be a crime analyst. And you get in there and say, oh, it's a lot of statistics. And I really don't like to do statistics every day or sit in front of a computer. I thought I'd get to go out to the field with a detective, like on TV, and wake up, right? There's a reality to that. So from the new analyst standpoint, and what I try to encourage people, say, hey, the money may or may not be there. I think a lot of folks continue, and it's a concern I've got, the state retirements and things like that. You don't calculate that into your salary. But now that I'm at retirement age, man, I am so happy I have made investments into a state retirement system that allow me to live a lifestyle that after I'm done working in a way that I can enjoy my life, be with my kids and grandkids and things like that. So full circle in terms of what some of that is. But I think it's also finding your passion, right? And if you really love understanding criminal behavior and deviant behavior, if that's in your DNA, you couldn't be in a better career, right? Understanding the criminal mind. A guy named David Cantor wrote the book Mapping Murder out of London, right? He was one of the geographic profilers that were out there. And we brought him in for a week at CMAP. And he talked about, he's a psychologist, PhD in psychology. And he actually said over his career as a psychologist, he'd rather be in the shoes of offenders than in their brain, thinking, this is just too difficult to understand what they're in their mind, what they're motivating. But if I know where they've been and what they're seeing and looking at, he goes, I can do more to predict and forecast, their criminal behavior than the other way. And some of his books are just amazing when you think about that, geographic profiling, criminal profiling. But it's that culmination of understanding criminal behavior. Jack Maple's book, The Crime Fighter, talks about what it takes to be a good cop and a good detective and a good crime analyst. It's the 3rd or 4th chapter, and I would love to teach a class called Crookology. The name of the chapter is Crookology, the study of crooks and how they operate. And he talks about that. That's a really easy book to read. That's kind of on a shelf. Most people, my age might have read it, but that's one that I'm using right now in a class at George Mason University to get them to understand. If you can think like a crook, walk and talk like a crook, you'll be a better analyst, and that's where you'll get your passion, right? It really becomes a competition. It really becomes this, I'm going to catch this guy. I'm vested in the investigation, or I'm vested in the victim and who they are. Victim services, those people get burnt out. They're so, close to the people they're working with. They have so much passion for victims. We should have that kind. And you don't have to have 100% of it. You have to have enough to keep you motivated to stay in the career. And then it's not as much about money. Money's important. We live in a capitalist society. I get it. But if you're not in a job you love, and you're going to work 30 years, for me, no amount of money would have kept me in a career that I wasn't passionate about. And so maybe money's not quite as important to me. I respect that. But that's what, if you can find that, that's what's going to keep you and get you involved in the IACA and keep you around for 10, 20, in my case, 30 years, still passionate about what I do. I got no business having this much energy. I can't explain it. I am getting tired. I am getting to I like going to bed. I used to hate going to bed. I'd be the last guy at the bar, first one up in the morning. You called to set this interview up. I'm like, oh my God, I was going to sleep in this morning. I go, okay, I need to go down and get a picture, so I'm going to have Manny take my picture for my department, but I'm going to do this interview because I think it's important to have the conversation. So here I am at 8:15 in the morning on the last day of the conference, you know, the guy that ought to be granddad that is to sit in the lawn chair and out front and not have to worry about it. And I love what we do, and I thank you for what you're doing, like you and Jason, you know, continuing to make sure people have a voice, and we've got to find ways to not just speak among ourselves, but do that. In my justice studies graduate work, I also have a great deal of compassion for victims who live in poor neighborhoods. You know, that we know most of the crime happens in poor neighborhoods. You know, that's where a lot of offenders come from. But the truth of the matter is that's where the lion's share. People of color are also disproportionately the victims of crime. And if we miss those facts, right? You talk about the data, that's who we're protecting. Right? And we get this pushback and the anti-police sentiment. It's not coming from those communities that want the police there to help them so their kids can be outside or playing or not being drawn into gangs or not getting caught up into drug activity. There's so much of that. We've got a lot of work to do on a larger scale for, you know, really the quality of life for people. But day in and day out, the police and us as crime analysts provide knowledge and services to those folks that really wouldn't get it anywhere else. And so as much as it's about catching that bad guy, I want to turn it and say it's also about the people that are the reoccurring victims, repeat victims of those crimes, that we really ought to make sure we in our heads know that's who we serve. You know, because it's what we do is very important, and sometimes I think we like it. Some of us have a passion for it, but we really don't put ourselves at a high enough pedestal in terms of what we do for society. And I know that's a 10,000 foot, you know, kind of fuzzy kind of thing to say, but day in and day out, we're talking about real people, real people's lives, sexual assault, you know, those kinds of things that literally can devastate them. And we need to make sure that there's one less victim as often as we can. Thank you. It's been fun, always fun. Good to see you, Manny.
That was Dr. Noah Fritz, Director of Analytics, IACA past president, grandfather of crime analysis, and friend. Thanks for checking out this episode from the All About Analysis channel. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like, hit subscribe, click that bell, and don't forget to share this video. See you next time.